Good day, everyone. Today, we are going to learn about the elements of a short story. Here are the things that we need to know about the elements of a short story. The story has the following elements. 1. It has a setting, characters, plot, conflict, resolution, point of view, and theme. These are the elements of a short story. Setting, characters, plot, conflict, resolution, point of view, and theme. The setting is the where and when of a story. It is the time and place during which the story takes place. The setting, the time and place are where the action occurs. The details that describe the furniture, the scenery, the costumes, the transportation, the clothing, the dialects, the weather, the time of day, and time of year. The functions of a setting are the following: to create a mood or atmosphere, to show a reader a different way of life, to make action seem more real, be the source of conflict or struggle, and to symbolize an idea. Now, mood is the feeling that the author tries to convey throughout the story, the atmosphere or emotional condition created by the piece within the setting. Does the author want the reader to be frightened or sad? Or does the story make the reader laugh and think happy thoughts? To figure out mood, examine how you feel while you're reading the story. Often mood is conveyed by the story's setting. Now let's go to the characters. Characters are the person, the animals, and things participating in a story. Characters are protagonists and antagonists, which are used to describe characters in the story. The protagonist is the main character of the story, the one with whom the reader identifies. This person is not necessarily good. The antagonist is the force in opposition of the protagonist. This person may not be bad or evil, but he or she opposes the protagonist in a significant way. Let's go to plot. Plot is the organized pattern or sequence of events that make up a story. Plot is the literary element that describes the structure of a story. It shows arrangement of events and actions within a story. The following are the parts of a plot. First is the exposition. It is the introduction. This is where the characters, the setting, and conflict or the problem are introduced. Second is the rising action. This is where the events that occur as a result of the central conflict. Then next is climax, which is the highest point of interest or suspense of the story. Then falling action. In here, the tension eases. Events show the results of how the main character begins to resolve the conflict. And lastly, the resolution. This is the loose end. This is where the loose ends are tied up. The conflict is resolved. So here is a plot diagram of the elements of the plot or the parts of the plot. Number 1 is the exposition, followed by the rising action. Third is the climax, which is the highest point of interest, then the falling action, and the resolution. Let's discuss each. Let's begin with exposition. This usually occurs at the beginning of a story. Here, the characters are introduced. We also learn about the setting of the story. Most importantly, we are introduced to the main conflict or the main problem in the story. Next is the rising action. This part of the story begins to develop the conflict or the conflicts. Building of interest or suspense occurs and leads to the climax. It is in this part of the story where complications arise. The third is the climax. This is the turning point of the story. Usually the main character comes face to face with a conflict. The main character will change in some way. This is the most intense moment in a story. The fourth is the falling action. Here, the action that follows the climax and ultimately leads to the resolution. The last is the resolution. This is where the conclusion and all loose ends are tied up. Either the character defeats the problem, learns to live with the problem, or the problem defeats the character. So putting it all together, we have the following elements of, the following parts of the plot: the exposition, the rising action, the climax, falling action, and the resolution. So the exposition and the rising action is the beginning of a story, while the climax is the middle part of the story. The falling action and the resolution is the end part of the story. I hope you remember that well. So here is again the diagram of the plot. So the introduction or the exposition, this is where the setting, the characters, and the conflict are introduced. The rising action, this is where the development of the action leading to the climax. Then the falling action, then the resolution. We have, or there rather are special techniques used in a story. And these are suspense, which is using excitement, tension, or curiosity. We also have foreshadowing, the giving of hints or clue about what will happen in the story. We also have flashback, which interrupts the normal sequence of events to tell about something that happened in the past. We also have symbolism, which use the use of specific objects or images to represent ideas. Then personification, when you make a thing, idea, or animal do something only humans do. Then also the surprise ending, which the conclusion that readers does not expect. So these are the special techniques used in the story. As you can see, or as you read stories, you will be able to know and identify these techniques as how authors use them in a story. Then let's go to the next element, which is the conflict. The conflict is the dramatic struggle between two forces in a story. Without conflict, there is no plot. The conflict is a problem that must be solved, an issue between the protagonist and antagonist forces. It forms the basis of the plot. Conflicts can be external or internal. External conflicts are outside force, which may be from person, group, animal, nature, or non-human obstacle. We also have the internal conflict, which takes place in a character's mind. There are types of conflicts, or there are types rather of external conflicts that are prevalent in different stories. Examples are character versus character, character versus nature, character versus society, and character versus fate. And we only have one type of internal conflict, and that is character versus self. Let's go to the next element. This is the point of view. We have the first person point of view. Here, the character from the story is telling the story, which uses the pronouns I and me. The third person point of view is an outside narrator who is telling the story, who uses the pronouns he, she, and they. So we have two types of third person point of view: the third person limited and the third person omniscient. The third person limited is the narrator knows the thoughts and feelings of only one character in a story, while the third person omniscient, the narrator knows the thoughts and feelings of all the characters in the story. Again, the third person limited only the narrator knows the feelings and thoughts of only one character in the story, whereas the third person omniscient knows all the thoughts and feelings of all the characters in the story. Now let's go to theme. The theme is the central, general message, the main idea, the controlling topic about life or people the author wants to get across through his or her literary work. This is to discover, in order to discover the theme of a story, we need to think big. What big message is the author trying to say about the world in which we live? And what is the story telling me about how life works or how people behave? The theme is also the practical lesson or moral that we learn from a story after we read it, the lesson that teaches us what to do or how to behave after you have learned something from a story or something that has happened to you. Example is the lesson or teaching of the story is be careful when you're offered something for nothing. Let's go to the figures of speech or the figurative language. In here, we try to figure out the meaning of the expression used by a speaker. So figurative and literal language, let us first differentiate the two. Literally, words function exactly as defined. Examples, the car is blue. He caught the football. Figuratively, we figure out what it means. Examples, I've got your back. You're a doll. These are figures of speech. Now, from the literal language, we mean that the car is color blue and that he caught the football. For the figurative expressions, it does not mean that the person speaking actually has gotten the back of the person he's referring to, or that he refers to the person exactly like he's a doll, or he that he or she is a doll. We mean here that we need to figure out what the speaker meant by saying those expressions. So these are figurative language. So we begin with simile. Simile is a comparison of two things using like or as. Examples. The metal twisted like a ribbon. She is as sweet as candy. For simile, this is most commonly used in expressions, and it is somewhat also easy to identify because you just need to look for hints if there is comparison of two things and if such comparison uses the expressions like or as. So, important thing to put in mind, using like or as doesn't make a simile always, doesn't make an expression always a simile. So it doesn't mean that if you see an expression which has simile, or rather which has like or as, that is similar right away. No, there must be a comparison. Again, a comparison must be made. Here, I like pizza. Here in this first example, we have the word like, but in this example, we have no comparison. In the second example, the moon is like a pizza. Now, this is where comparison is present. The moon and pizza are being compared. That's hence is the use of the word like. The second example is a simile, while the first example is not a simile. Again, the presence of the expressions like and as does not always make a sentence or statement a figure of speech. You need to see if there is a comparison being made. Okay, now let's go to metaphor. Metaphor is the comparison of two things without using like or as. Examples. All the world is a stage. Men are dogs. Her heart is stone. So for personification, this is the giving of human traits to object or ideas, as if these objects or ideas are men or live like men. Examples are the sunlight danced, water on the lake shivers, the streets are calling me. In personification, you always have to look at the idea that human qualities, human attributes are given to objects or ideas. So that's the hint of personification. Next is hyperbole. Hyperbole is the exaggerating to show strong feeling or effect. So you exaggerate the statement, you exaggerate the idea in order to show strong feeling or effect for that instance. Example, I will love you forever. My house is a million miles away. She'd kill me. My house is a million miles away. That means that the house is really far, right? And she'd kill me. That does not literally mean that the person will kill you, but she'd do anything for you, for that matter. So let's go to the understatement. Understatement is an expression with less strength than expected. This is the opposite of hyperbole. Examples are, I'll be there in 1 second. This won't hurt a bit. So those are examples of an understatement. So yeah, let's proceed to onomatopoeia. Onomatopoeia. So these are words that make a sound. Example, splat, ping, slam, pop, po. So words that make sounds are onomatopoeia. Let's go to idioms. Idioms are a saying that isn't meant to be taken literally. Doesn't mean what it says. Don't be a stick in the mud. You're the apple of my eye. I have an ace up my sleeve. These are idiomatic expressions, and how they are stated should not be taken literally because they mean something. They mean beyond what their words speak. Now let's also have pun. Pun is a form of wordplay in which words have a double meaning. Examples, I wondered why the baseball was getting bigger and then it hit me. I'm reading a book about anti-gravity. It's impossible to put it down. I was going to look for my missing watch, but I didn't have time. So these are play of words. Then let's have proverb. A proverb is a figurative saying in which a bit of wisdom is given. Examples are an apple a day keeps the doctor away, the early bird catches the worm. So these are proverbs. Now let's have also oxymoron. Oxymoron is when two words are put together that contradict each other or that they are opposite with each other. Examples, jumbo shrimp, pretty ugly, freezer burn. Now for oxymoron, most often than not, these expressions are actually put together with each other. They're close, meaning they stay side by side. And they're opposite, then that will give you the idea that what you are reading is an oxymoron. So I want you to get your paper and you try to answer these statements and identify what figures of speech is used in the following statement. I will read the sentences and write your answers in your paper or in your notebook or whatever paper you have. Okay? Let's start. Number one, he drew a line as straight as an arrow. Number two, knowledge is a kingdom, and all who learn are kings and queens. Number four, the sun was beating down on me. Number five, a flag wags like a fishhook there in the sky. Number six, I'd rather take baths with a man-eating shark or wrestle a lion alone in the dark, eat spinach and liver, pet 10 porcupines, than tackle the homework my teacher assigns. 7. Ravenous and savage from its long polar journey, the north wind is searching for food. Number 8. Dinner is on the house. Number 9. Can I have one of your chips? Number 10. Don't bite the hand that feeds you. Number 11. The clouds smiled down at me. Number 12. Splat. 13. She is as sweet as candy. 14. I could sleep forever. 15. He drove his expensive car into a tree and found out the Mercedes Benz. 16. I used to have fear of hurdles, but I got over it. 17. The wheat field was a sea of gold. 18. The streets called to him. 19. Pop. 20. She was dressed to the nines. 21. The early bird catches the worm. 22. Old news. 23. Your face is killing me. 24. She was as white as a ghost. 25. She has a skeleton in her closet. So those were expressions in using figurative language. So just reserve your answers there in your paper and go back to the discussion and try to figure out whether you got the correct answer. Now let's proceed to the elements of poetry. The elements of poetry. What is poetry? Poetry is not prose. Prose is the ordinary language people use in speaking or writing. Poetry is a form of literary expression that captures intense experiences or creative perceptions of the world in a musical language. Basically, if prose is like talking, poetry is like singing. By looking at the setup of a poem, you can see the difference between prose and poetry. So these are the distinguishing characteristics of poetry. Unlike prose, which has a narrator, poetry has a speaker. A speaker or voice talks to the reader. The speaker is not necessarily the poet. It can also be a fictional person, an animal, or even a thing. Example, But believe me, son, I want to be what I used to be when I was like you. This is from Once Upon a Time by Gabriel Okara. Another distinguishing characteristic is poetry is also formatted differently from prose. A line is a word or row of words that may or may not form a complete sentence. Prose has sentences in it, while poetry has lines, which are forming stanzas. A stanza is a group of lines forming a unit. The stanzas in a poem are separated by a space. Examples: open it, that is one line. This it can also be interpreted in this example as one stanza. Next is go ahead, it won't bite. Well, maybe a little. That's the second stanza. This is from the first book by Rita Dove. The figures of speech are also used in poetry, or should I say, it's one of the most important elements of poetry, figures of speech. A figure of speech is a word or expression that is not meant to be read literally. One commonly used figure of speech in poetry is, as what we have discussed previously, simile. Simile is a figure of speech which use words such as like or as to compare seemingly unlike things. Again, let's repeat that simile compares two unlike things using the expressions like and as. Examples? Example, rather. Does it stink like rotten meat? This is from Harlem by Langston Hughes. Another figure of speech is metaphor. Metaphor compares seemingly unlike things, but does not use like or as. Again, metaphor is somewhat the same with simile, only that in metaphor, it does not use the expressions like or as. It directly compares two unlike things. Example, the moon is a white sliver. This is from I Am Singing Now by Lucy Tapahonso. You also have personification. Personification attributes human-like characteristics to an animal, object, or idea. Again, let me repeat the idea of using personification in statement. You use personification when you put human attributes or human characteristics and qualities to animals, objects, or ideas. Example, a spider soared at night. This is from A Spider Soared at Night by Emily Dickinson. Another figure of speech is hyperbole, a figure of speech in which great exaggeration is used for emphasis or humorous effect. Example, you've asked me a million times. It does not mean that the person has actually asked the person a million times, but that would only give the emphasis that the person has asked the question repeatedly. We also have imagery. Imagery is descriptive language that applies to the senses. These are the sense of sight, sound, touch, the taste, or smell. Some images appeal to more than one sense. We also have the use of sound devices in poetry. We have alliteration, which is the repetition of consonant sounds at the beginning of words. Assonance, the repetition of vowel sounds within the line of poetry. Again, let me repeat Alliteration is the repetition of consonant sounds at the beginning of words, while assonance is the repetition of vowel sounds within a line of poetry. Onomatopoeia, as what we have discussed, is the use of a word or phrase such as his or buzz that imitates or suggests the sounds that it describes. So examples of sound devices we have: in the steamer is the trout, seasoned with slavers of ginger, from Eating Together by Lee Young Lee. And the stars never rise, but I see the bright eyes, from Annabel Lee by Edgar Allan Poe. We also have one important element of poetry, which is rhyme. Rhyme is the repetition of the same stressed vowel, sound, and any succeeding sounds in two or more words within the line or stanza. Internal rhyme occurs within a line of poetry, while end rhyme occurs at the end of lines. Rhyme scheme is the pattern of end rhymes that may be designated by assigning a different letters of the alphabet to each new rhyme. Example, we have all mine, Yertle cried. Oh, the things I now rule. I'm king of a cow, and I'm king of a mule. I'm king of a house, and what's more beyond that, I'm king of blueberry bush and cat. I'm Yertle the turtle, O marvelous me, for I am the ruler of all that I see. This is from Yertle the Turtle by Dr. Seuss. So the rhyme scheme of this example is we have A, B, B, C, C. A there represents the first sound, which is rule, and mule. If the first sound is repeated in the second sound, you just copy the letter. That's why you have AA. Now for the third line, the sound is that. That is not the same with mule and rule, hence we use a different letter, which is the next letter of the alphabet, B. That's why we have AA and B. The next letter, or the next sound is cat. Cat rhymes with that. So we copy the letter of that to represent cat. So B, we have now AA, B, B. Now the next one is me. Me does not rhyme with cat and mule. Hence, we will use another letter to represent this sound, and that is C. Because C, as the last word in the stanza, rhymes with me, hence is the presence of C as the last letter in the rhyme scheme. That is why our rhyme scheme for this example is AA, BB, CC. Next example. In the pathway of the sun, in the footstep of the breeze, where the world and sky are one, he shall ride the silver seas, he shall cut the glittering wave, I shall sit at home and rock, rise to heed a neighbor's knock, brew my tea and snip my thread, bleach the linen for my bed, they will call him brave. This is from Penelope by Dorothy Parker. So the rhyme scheme for this stanza, or for this example, is we have A, B, A, B, C, D, D, E, E, C. To get the rhyme scheme, just please follow what we did in the first example. Identify the sound, then represent the sound with the letters of the alphabet. Of course, we always begin with letter A, and if the next sound does not sound with the first sound, you use the next letter, letter B. And if it sounds the same, use the same letter. And if it rather does not sound the same, use the succeeding letter in the alphabet. Now let's go to rhythm and meter. Rhythm is the pattern of sound created by the arrangement of stressed and unstressed syllables in a line. Rhythm can be regular or irregular. Meter, on the other hand, is a regular pattern of stressed and unstressed syllables which sets the overall rhythm of certain poems. Typically, stressed syllables are marked with and unstressed syllables are marked with U, like U symbol. It's what you can see on the screen. The stressed syllable, let me just emphasize, is marked with that mark you see on our screen. In order to measure how many syllables are there per line, they are measured in feet. A foot consists of a certain number of syllables forming a line of a verse. We have the first meter, which is the iambic meter. The iambic meter is the most common type of meter. An iamb is a foot consisting of an initial unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable. For example, return, displace, to love, my heart. A pentameter, on the other hand, is a line of verse containing 5 metrical feet. So the significance of an iambic pentameter is it is the closest to our everyday speech. Hence, it facilitates the easy understanding of a poem. And in addition, it mimics the sound of a heartbeat, a sound common to all human beings. Finally, one of the most influential writers of our times uses iambic pentameter in all that he writes, and that is William Shakespeare. Examples of these are, first example, and death is better, as the millions know. Then dandruff, night starvation, or BO. This is from Letter to Lord Byron by W.H. Auden. Example number 2, when you are old and gray and full of sleep, and nodding by the fire, take down this book by W.B. Yeats. We also have the element of connotation and denotation in poetry. Connotation is the emotional and imaginative surrounding of a word, or rather the imaginative association which surrounds a word. The denotation is the strict dictionary meaning of a word. Examples: you may live in a house, but we live in a home. So this is where you see connotation and denotation. Now, let us have an exercise. Let us try to identify which of the following has a more favorable connotation. Again, connotation is the meaning of the word as to how they are used in context, or meaning as to how they are used inside the text or in a line or stanza. We have thrifty, penny pinching, or pushing, aggressive, politician, statesman, then chef, cook, slender, skinny. Remember that when you choose to use these words, you should use the following words accordingly and appropriately, meaning they should fit the circumstances and the atmosphere of the poem. So for the elements, for the formal elements of poetry, when we explore the connotation and denotation of a poem, we are looking at the poet's diction. Diction in poetry refers, or even in writing, in formal writing, diction refers to the choice of words by an author or poet. Diction is different in singing because in singing, somewhat diction refers to how the words are uttered and produced. But in poetry and in writing, diction refers to the choice of words by an author or the poet. Many times, a poet's diction can help unlock the tone or mood of the poem. The mood, feeling, the emotion, the circumstances that are within the poem itself. So, the elements of poetry, we focus now on tone and mood. Although many times we use the words mood and tone interchangeably, they do not necessarily mean the same thing. Mood is the feeling or atmosphere that a poet creates. Mood can suggest an emotion, example, excited, or the quality of a setting, calm, somber. In a poem, mood can be established through word choice, line length, rhythm, and etc. While tone is the reflection of the poet's attitude towards the subject of a poem. Tone can be serious, sarcastic, humorous, etc. Let us first discuss one type of a poem, which is also very common in the early literature. This is the narrative poetry. Narrative poetry is verse that tells a story. Two of the major examples of narrative poetry includes ballads and epics. Ballads are songs or poems that tell story. Folk ballads, which typically tell of an exciting or dramatic event, were composed by an anonymous singer or author and passed on by word of mouth for generations before they are written down. Literally, or rather, literary ballads are written in imitation of folk ballads, but usually given an author. While epics are long narrative poems on a great and serious subject that is centered on the actions of heroic figures. Most countries around the world have their own epic, meaning, yeah, have their epics, but maybe most countries have an epic that represent their country itself. We also have dramatic poetry. Dramatic poetry is poetry in which one or more characters speak. Each speaker always addresses a specific listener. This listener may be silent but identifiable, or the listener may be another character who speaks in a reply. Usually, the conflict that the writer is involved with is either an intense or emotional. We also have lyric poetry. Lyric poetry is poetry that expresses a speaker's personal thoughts and feelings. Lyric poems are usually short and musical. This broad category covers many poetic types and styles, including haikus, sonnets, free verse, and many others. So, example, let us tackle haikus. Haikus are the traditional Japanese haiku, which is an unrhymed poem that contains exactly 17 syllables arranged in three lines of 5 syllables each. However, when poems written in Japanese are translated into another language, this pattern is often lost. The purpose of a haiku is to capture a flash of insight that occurs during a solitary observation of nature. So let's have some examples of haikus. Here is one written by Shiyoni. Since morning glories hold my well bucket hostage, I beg for water. Another one by Kijo Murakami. First autumn morning, the mirror I stare into shows my father's face. Let us have sonnets. Background of sonnets. Sonnets are form invented in Italy. Most, if not all, of Shakespeare's sonnets are about love or a theme related to love. Well, William Shakespeare, has written lots of sonnets in his entire career as poet. Sonnets are usually written in a series, with each sonnet a continuous subject to the next, like sequels in movies. So, sequence of sonnets. Shakespeare wrote 154 sonnets and can be broken up by the characters they address. Fair Youth, sonnets 1 to 126, are devoted to a young man of extreme physical beauty. The first 17 sonnets urge the young man to pass on his beauty to the next generation through children. From sonnet 18 on, Shakespeare shifts his viewpoint and writes how the poetry itself will immortalize the young man and allow his beauty to carry on. We also have the Dark Lady. The Dark Lady, we these are the Dark Lady sonnets of Shakespeare are represented in his sonnets 127 to 154, which talk about an irresistible woman of questionable morals who captivates the young poet. These sonnets speak of an affair between the speaker and her, but her unfaithfulness has hurt the speaker. The rival poet. This character shows up during the Fair Youth series. The poet sees the rival poet as someone trying to take his own fame, and the poems refer to his own anxiety and insecurities. So let us discuss the structure of sonnets. The traditional Elizabethan or Shakespearean sonnet consists of 14 lines, which is made up of 3 quatrains, or stanzas of 4 lines each, and a final couplet meaning 2 line stanza. Sonnets are usually written in iambic pentameter. Well, Shakespeare is most known to this meter, which is the iambic pentameter. The quatrains traditionally follow an ABAB rhyme scheme, followed by a rhyming couplet. So let's have an example. Let's take Shakespeare's Sonnet 18. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds though shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. Sometimes too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his gold complexion dimmed, and every fair from fair sometime declines, by chance or nature's changing course, and trimmed. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou owest, nor shall death brag thou wanderest in his shade, when in eternal lines to time thou growest. So long as men can breathe, or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. That is Sonnet 18. Again, Sonnet 18. Sonnet 18 is in reference to the man or the poet whom Shakespeare referred to live and has to pass on his beauty to the next generation. So there you see the quatrains. Quatrains meaning stanzas consist of 4 lines. So we have 3 quatrains here, 1, 2, 3, and a couplet. The couplet are the 2 last lines in a sonnet. So Shakespeare is known for these kind of sonnet. This is the Shakespearean sonnet rather. So we have in a Shakespearean sonnet we have 3 quatrains and a couplet, thus forming the 14 lines. Now we have the free verse. Free verse is poetry that has no fixed pattern of meter, rhyme, line length, or stanza arrangement. When writing free verse, a poet is free to vary the poetic elements to emphasize an idea or create a tone. In writing free verse, a poet may choose to use repetition or similar grammatical structures to emphasize and unify the ideas in the poem. Free verse examples are songs are also kinds of poetry. These are free verse. While the majority of popular poetry today is written as free verse, the style itself is not new. Walt Whitman, writing in the 1800s, created free verse poetry based on forms found in the King James Bible. Modern free verse is concerned with the creation of a brief, ideal image, not the refined order and artificial according to some critics, but patterns that other forms of poetry encompass. Examples of free verse aside from songs. The lunatic is carried at last to the asylum, a confirmed case. He will never sleep any more as he did it in the cot in his mother's bedroom. The door printer, with grey head and gaunt jaws, works at his case. He turns his quid of tobacco, his eyes blurred with the manuscript. The malformed limbs are tied to the anatomist's table. What is removed drops horribly in the pail. The quadroon girl is sold at the stand. The drunkard nods by the barroom stove. This is an excerpt from the Song of Myself, section 15 by Walt Whitman. Now let us continue with drama. This is sourced from www.huntsvilleisd.org CMS library. What is drama? Now let us know the origins of drama. The word drama comes from the Greek verb dran, which means to do. The earliest known plays were written around the 5th century BC, produced for festivals to honor Dionysus, the god of wine and fertility. Aristotle was born in Macedonia in 384 BC and died 62 years later in 322 BC, was a student at Plato's Academy and later became one of the greatest philosophers of ancient Greece. One of his treatises, the Poetics, he outlines his 6 elements of drama, which was based on the ancient Greek belief that tragedy was the highest form of drama. This outline has become a guideline for many playwrights throughout history and is especially emphasized in the works of William Shakespeare. For Aristotle, there are 6 elements of drama, and these are plot, theme, character, diction, music, and spectacle. Elements 1 and 2, which are plot and theme, are also elements that you also see in short story. For plot in a drama, this is the sequence that happens in a play. This is the order of events, the story as opposed to the theme, what happens rather than what it means. While theme is what the play means as opposed to what happens, just as what is in the plot. It is the main idea within the play. While for elements 3 and 4, character, diction, or language or dialogue, for character, it pertains here to the personality or the part an actor represents in a play, a role played by an actor in a play. Diction, language, dialogue are the word choices made by the playwright or the writer and the enunciation of the actors delivering the line. While elements 5 and 6, which are music or rhythm and spectacle, these has to do now in the presentation of the drama piece before an audience. So music or rhythm, by music Aristotle meant the sound, the rhythm, and the melody of the speeches. For spectacle, this is the visual elements of the production of a play, the scenery, the costumes, and special effects in a production. For the dramatic structure, like the plot of a story, the plot of a play involves characters who face a problem or a conflict. So it has almost the same structure or elemental structure with that of the plot of a short story, but in the plot of a play, there are only 4 parts or 4 elements for that matter. We have the exposition, complication, climax, and the resolution. In the exposition, this is where the characters and conflict are introduced, same as with the short story. For complications, this is where the tension builds. Climax, the highest point of interest or the tension. This is where the action determines how the conflict will be resolved, and the resolution, conflict is resolved, then the play ends. For Shakespeare's play, it also has a different structure. It has 5 acts, known as Act 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. For Act 1, this is where the exposition, the exciting force, and the rising action is placed. Act 2 is the inclination or development of the rising action. Act 3, the continuation of the rising action leading to the climax, into the falling action, the introduction of the falling action. Act number 4 is the building of the rising action itself. Then act number 5, the rising action, building the catastrophe, then leading to the ending of the play. Stages in a play are wrapped in different terms. We have first the exposition, which is the general atmosphere, the time, the place, the main characters, and opening conditions of play. The exciting force, on one hand, is something that happens which starts the action of the play moving usually in the first act, while the rising action, this is a series of actions usually covering more than one act. During the rising action, the protagonist is the active force trying to make things work out as he or she intended. Protagonist or the main character. While the climax, this is where the protagonist reaches a peak of his or her power and a distinct change occurs in them, as well as the direction of the action. Things begin to go against the protagonist, who seems to be following a downward path. While for falling action, this also covers several scenes and shows all the ways the main events are going against the main character. At this time, the protagonist begins to rise in power. The conflict begins, rather, the conflict between the protagonist and the antagonist becomes the essence of the play. And the moment of final suspense, this is usually found in the 5th act of the play. The moment of final suspense has a particular function in the organization of the plot. Close to the end of the play, it is more significant to the protagonist than that it is to the audience. It is the moment when things begin to look as if they will go the way of the protagonist again. He or she momentarily believes that tragedy will be averted. And for that part where the catastrophe happens or the stage of the play is concluded, the catastrophe is the complete downfall of the protagonist, either through death or some other devastating circumstance. If the protagonist is a villain, then the catastrophe will be seen by the audience as a good thing. If not, then the other way around. Dramatic structure is developing. It is dynamic and active. So for dramatic structure to be dynamic, the conflict is presented in a way that is relevant and material to the audience. Conflict here is the struggle or the clash between opposing characters or forces. A conflict may develop between characters who want different things or the same thing, between a character and his or her circumstances, within a character who is torn by competing desires. Do you remember the 5 mans versus man, man versus himself, man versus nature, man versus fate, man versus society? These are the kinds also of conflicts in drama, same as in the story. Performance of a play. When you read a play, remember that it is meant to be performed for an audience. We have here the stage directions, which are in the play itself or in the script of the play. The playwright describes the setting and characters, the actions and manners. Example, Fiona is sitting on the couch. She sees Paul and jumps to her feet. Fiona, angrily, what do you want? How the dialogue should be delivered. Then for the performance, we have here the theater artists bring the playwright's vision to life on the stage. The audience responds to the play and shares the experience. Now, during the performance of a play, theater artists include the actors, the directors, the lighting, technicians, and the stage crew. We also have the setting of the stage. Stages can have many different sizes and layouts. We have the commonly called the thrust stage. The stage extends into a viewing area where the audience surrounds the stage on three sides, like an arena, but not the arena which has a circular form or a semicircular form. A thrust stage is what you see on the screen. That's the example given on the picture. The setting of the stage still in the round stage is, well, in the round stage, as the name itself suggests, is surrounded by an audience on all sides. Like it's a 360 view of the entire performance of the play. The audience surrounds the actors playing the drama. Then we also have the proscenium stage. Here, the playing area extends behind an opening called proscenium arc. The audience sits on one side looking into the action. So we have here the upstage, the stage right, the stage left, and the downstage, as what you can see on your screen. Then we also have the stages in Shakespeare's time, which were commonly the thrust stages, as depicted on the picture on the screen. The character's speech may take any of the following forms. We have dialogue. For dialogue, these are conversations of characters on stage. These are long speeches given by one character to others. Soliloquy, speech by a character alone on stage, to himself or herself or to the audience. And asides are remarks made to the audience or to one character. The other characters on stage do not hear an aside. Finally, the audience. For a stage play, the audience plays an active role also. So there are three responsibilities of an audience during a stage performance. Number one is to experience the performance, understand the story, and respond to the characters. Experience the performance means to feel the emotion, to be thrilled when the action is thrilling, to feel fear that the characters are feeling during the performance, to be sad because that is what is the emotion is calling, to be happy and to understand the story, to understand the actions that maneuvers the character to live and to participate in his role as such and respond to the character, meaning to relate to the characterization being depicted by an actor. So that is our lesson for today's video. So far, we have discussed 4 lessons for our literature concepts. We have discussed the elements of short story, figures of speech, poetry and its elements, and we also discussed drama. I hope you understood the concepts that we have tackled and you remember them because all throughout your course in English for high school up to the senior high school and even in college would just be the same. These topics are resounding, meaning they are universal, they are present in other literature, especially they are technically discussed more fully in college courses in English. So if you find other concepts still lacking, just please go back to the discussion and try to listen again to the discussion so that you will fully understand it. And that is all for today, folks. And I will see you in our next lesson.